first as a lawyer. And you, was that part of your world? Is this something your family, your parents, was anybody a lawyer?
In my family, no.
Yeah.
No,
So
no, I
what-
was the first lawyer.
Was there an aha moment? Kind of, where are you from, Bridget?
I'm from the Genesee County area. I grew up in Elba, which is probably about the size of Celeron. It was a very small rural school. I graduated with around 53 classmates, and I knew that I wanted to do something larger than that, that the town that I grew up in wasn't big enough for what I was looking to do. I always knew I wanted to help people. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I can say that in law school, I was driven by a law school clinic that was working with kids who had special needs.
Mhm.
And so I worked in the education law clinic and was involved with, and the name right now is going to draw a blank. First name is Bruce, and he's always been an advocate for people with disabilities, especially the hearing impaired, because his children were deaf. And got involved with one of the suits against the New York State School for the Blind in terms of services that were being provided, and I worked on that through the law clinic. And I thought, I think I found my aha moment. I want to work with kids. I'd like to work with kids with disabilities. And that's how I started. That's where I drew my passion, and I was very fortunate that I saw an opening. I did not know, to be honest with you, where Jamestown, New York was. I'd never been in Jamestown,
By the way,
New
just
York.
for the record, college was where?
State University of New York at Buffalo.
And likewise, law school?
Yes, I
Okay.
did all my years in Buffalo. And actually, I think, to take a step back, Dean Hedrick taught a class for undergraduates, and I took that, and I think that was when I really knew. It was going to either be social work or law, and that was it for me. And he was very, very nice, very passionate, and again, sparked an interest, but I didn't know what field, what area I really wanted to specialize in. But at that point, you know, I said I want to work with kids, and lo and behold, this job was advertised, and I sent in my resume. And
What job was that?
It was a job working for the Independent Living Center. It was a grant-funded program that Dr. Joseph DiCarlo had written and was successful in getting. We were one of 35 centers at that time. It was actually Just Present was involved in getting a center designated in Jamestown, New York. It was to help provide services to people with disabilities, especially those who were not capable of being employed at that point, but needed more stability. They needed a stable income. They needed housing that was suitable for their disabilities, and all the other things that go along with what people don't understand is a lot of people with disabilities don't often have opportunities to have part-time jobs. And so they need skills that we would call daily living skills prior to being employable. And so the program that I was hired to manage was to help people get these services and get established and stable so that they then could pursue employment through vocational rehabilitation.
So that was a Joe DiCarlo grant written under the auspices of then, what, the Achievement Center?
Yes,
Okay.
it was the Resource Center, and yeah, I think at that point it was the Achievement Center before they did the
Yeah.
name change.
And so what year would this been?
It was in 1983.
So 1983.
I was hired by Michael Raymond.
So you come to, you look on a map and you say, Jamestown, where is it? You see it's south of Buffalo, and you come down here. What's your first impression of this organization?
I can tell you my first interview with Michael was a whirlwind tour in his sports car. And I'm not a car person, but it was a sports car. And he got in and he toured me the whole place. At that time, it was the group homes. And what most blew me away was the recreation center. At that point, it had a pool that the floor raised and lowered, and he showed me, and I just could not believe it. The things that he had here in Jamestown, where I had never been, had never seen anything, was what everybody back in Erie County and Buffalo would have dreamed of having in their backyard. And that was just so impressive to come to this community and see all the things that were available here. it was shocking to me, and even after I started working here, to think that I thought these programs were available everywhere. And when I would contact people who would call, I said, well, don't you have this in Buffalo? No. I said, well, don't you have this in Buffalo? No. And it was just amazing to see what he had already started to build in 1983. It was, you could feel his passion for it, his dedication and commitment, but it was amazing. The foundation that he had, even at that point, was very impressive to see things that we were fighting for. Because back then, even schools were not really accessible very much to kids with disabilities, and that's what we were fighting for, is to give them inclusion and access to all the same services that everybody else got.
So this is called the Independent Living Center,
Yes.
and you became work under, who would you report to?
Dr. Joseph DiCarlo. And I was, again, Michael hired me unbeknownst to Dr. DiCarlo, and and there I was. And I would say there were several people knowing about Michael's past hires. This was a new program. I was the first manager of the program. They weren't quite sure where or how I arrived in the facility. So there was a little skepticism, like, who is she? What is she doing here? Does she really have the credentials? And I was a newly admitted attorney in the 4th Department, and I certainly was able to practice, and so that's how we got started. But yeah, it was, I was a surprise to a number of people who weren't aware that I was
So
being
give me the impression, so Dr. Joe, you walk in and say, hey, I'm the new manager here, I report to you, what should I do? And he goes, what? I mean, how did it play out?
That was basically it, but maybe both being Italians, we had a lot to share in common, and so I think Joe was great. He was a mentor that I could not be more appreciative of. He really guided me. I had never, my first job was to hire the staff. I mean, I literally started with a book. I didn't have an office. I worked out of the boardroom at Jones and Gifford. They gave me a book on independent living and said, here, read this, and here's the grant, and here's what you have to do. So I had no office. They were in the process of remodeling the Kappa building, which is now the Kappa building, but they were working on that. And until
Which, for the audience, that's really the Caprino
Yes,
furniture building on 2nd Street.
that's correct. And it had a furniture store with Tony and Grayo was on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a combined. But anyway, that was where I finally got my first office. And I was at the bottom of the stairs, so everybody coming and going walked by my door. So it was fun, but it took a while before I actually had an office where I could meet with people, and I got shifted around from place to place.
So it's a new program relatively, right? I mean, the grants were written to adapt to that and for us to be designated as a location, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, it was Senator Jess President who insisted, he had some clout at that time, and he insisted that there be one made available in Jamestown, and it had to be located in Jamestown, not in the outliers, in Jamestown.
Yeah. I know just a little bit of that background because Jess President would often come to our office and was good friends with my boss, Sherry Cadwell.
Right.
And I can remember those conversations because I was the young kid dragging along with Raymond trying to figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's funny, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it. But you don't even have day one, you really don't have a clients yet. I mean,
No.
you've got a program. Then you got to figure out, tell the world that you exist and to get clients. Were the clients principally from the Internal Resource Center, or did some of that come independent of that?
They came independently. Actually, they really got me involved because they were having problems getting people eligible for Social Security. And to get SSI benefits or Social Security disability, they wanted someone to represent their individuals so that they would have a substantial or a stable income. So Bruce Piatz was the person before I was hired. So Bruce, I can recall, took me to one hearing, and he kind of, here's what you're going to be doing, and Bruce was there and said, okay, this is it, here you go. And so that was what I was hired to do as well, to kind of serve in that capacity. So most of the individuals came. I did some of the medical procedures that had to be done needed state Supreme Court approval, and I would take those to Mayville and get the signatures from the judges to get the medical procedures done, because at that time, they didn't have the committees that they do now, the surrogate decision-making committees, and they didn't have the guardianship committee at that point.
So
So
that
they
Article
need-
18A didn't exist at
No.
that time, did it?
No, no, it didn't.
So you really were the first in-house counsel for the Resource Center.
Yes, that is exactly it. And I did, I know I did some other work, and actually, I incorporated the agency. After a year, the Independent Living Center was required to have a board of directors comprised of people with disabilities, a majority, and the Resource Center's charter was for a majority of parents or blood relatives of individuals with developmental disabilities. They could not, and at that time, no one thought about making it an affiliated corporation with its own board of directors, so we had to become separately incorporated. And I actually did that from beginning to end, got our tax exempt status, and we became Southwestern Independent Living Center in June of 1984.
Which was separate and apart
Yes,
from the Resource Center.
Yes,
So though you were commenced under the umbrella of the Resource Center, shortly thereafter became independent of it
yes.
and probably contracted with it.
Yes, we did. We contracted for payroll and human resources and all that, so that made it easier for me to make the transition. You know, we were still a fledgling organization. As you said, we had to serve other individuals in the community. We were getting a transportation program off the ground. I can still remember Mike's face. What are you doing buying a van? And it was, well, because under this program, we're supposed to be providing services not just to people at the Resource Center, we have to provide help to the community, and we do not have accessible transportation. And there's a real need. So we bought a wheelchair accessible van out of Buffalo, New York. I had a staff member drop me off in Buffalo, and I drove the van back. And I had never driven a van before, so it was an interesting experience. But yeah, Michael was not happy. He was also not happy that one of the people that I hired, and one of the reasons why we did get the van, she had cerebral palsy, Helen Kern, and she used to drive her own electric wheelchair back and forth to work. And he got complaints from several board members of the Resource Center that why we were allowing her to get back and forth to work, and she was a danger. She was in the street riding her wheelchair. And I said, we have no way to get her here. She can't ride in an agency vehicle because she's not living in a group home at that time. She has to get back and forth, and there is no transportation to get her to and from work. So they accepted it. He wasn't happy, but he accepted it. But he had quite a negative reaction to the purchase of another vehicle, because I think at that point, transportation was very costly to the agency, and it was a financial concern. Not so much a need, but a concern about the finances.
So you were, though independent corporately, you were still an independent, or the financials came from the Resource Center?
Right.
Through
Yeah.
the contract. And Helen, and I think I'm thinking of the right Helen, I mean, she's was with you, if not
Yes.
still is?
No, Helen was with me for about 30 years.
Yes.
She retired. And Helen, I have to thank tremendously, because it really opened my eyes. When you talk about accessibility, what we think and what people with needs like that, it's much more difficult for people to get around than people thought. She was instrumental in getting the city to get the curb cuts done. And we are light years ahead of many, many cities in New York State, including Buffalo. We've been at this for probably 15 years, and we're not quite done, but we're making progress. We get comments all the time from people that come from out of town, how accessible the downtown area is. It wasn't always that way. You know, people would have to, as she did, have to ride in the street, even in the winter, if she needed to go anywhere, because she couldn't get off the sidewalk. You didn't know where the curb was going to be, and I owe a lot to her. She did have a wheelchair. It was a Wheelchair Awareness Day, and actually now Senator Goodell and a number of notable figures went around the community and went to buildings, and we made them go to these offices and the bank and try to see if they could get in. And of course, many of them were not accessible. And we were just trying to show them these are the challenges
Yeah.
that people face in the community. So it was a real eye-opener for a lot of people, and I think helped move things forward.
You know, and that's an image I have of you is with she. And it's like you were together a lot, advocated a lot together, but she was the, I hate to use the term poster child, but she was out there with that disability, but she was front and center.
Yeah, no, she was, because it was her life. I mean, that was, and as I say, you know, when you try to talk to people about it, well, it's only got one step. Well, one step doesn't matter. If you're in a wheelchair and you're by yourself, one step might as well be a mountain. You're not
Yeah.
going to get over it. And, you know, she brought dignity to it. You know, the reason why you need to do this is because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And we were very fortunate that the mayor then, Sam Teresi, was very willing. I think he knew what it meant, and he embraced it, and they took it full on and started to make the changes. So it's a credit to Helen especially, but
Yeah.
a credit to the administration at that time to make sure that they did what they could do to make the community accessible to everyone. And we've got an aging population. You know, it's not, when people talk about accessibility, it's not just about people with physical disabilities. It's aging in place, it's people who are older, it's people even with temporary disabilities. Once you've got a broken leg or a broken hip, think about trying to walk up a set of stairs versus a ramp, pushing a wheelchair, or even going up with canes or crutches. It's a huge difference, and it's not, and it's delivery people, it's people with kids with strollers. You know, it's more than just, if people think these things are all being done just for the physically challenged, it's not the case. It really helps the whole community.
When you started in 1983, being hired by Mike Raymond, did you suspect that here we are in 2021, this would be your legacy?
No. Nope. Had no idea. I really didn't. I have family still in the Buffalo area. I can tell you my husband, quite frankly, thought we'd be here 2 years and I'd be gone and we'd be back in Buffalo. But I think it's been great. I don't regret anything. I think it's been a wonderful fit for not only myself but my family. And, you know, to think I've actually been here 38 years. On May 11th was 38 years in Jamestown, working at the same job. And I'm pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And I hope, you know, I'm not retiring yet, but there's going to come a day I'm going to have to hand it off. And I hope that whoever takes it on is as passionate about continuing to meet the challenges of people with disabilities.
Well, kudos. However, during this almost 38 years, you've dealt with, worked with many of the personalities at the Resource Center, which we're here to talk about, and let's start it with Mike Raymond. Now, we know he gave you this whirlwind tour, he wowed you, he hired you. So, but what else did you know about the guy? Or did you get to know about the guy?
Had a few, you know, experiences with Mike. You know, of course, he could be, you know, he's a hard person to put in a box because he was very innovative, very creative. He really saw the big picture, and he had a difficult time when things didn't go as quickly as he wanted. He had a pretty good temper, and he could certainly lose it when he thought things weren't being done quickly enough. But he was the most passionate person. I think, if I'm not mistaken, his brother had some type of disability, and I think that's probably where it came from. And I think he really saw the injustice and the inequities and really wanted to make things better for all people with disabilities. He really did. I think some of the programs that he initiated here in terms of the residences, he's got in on that very, very early in the intermediate care facility, Foote Avenue. They now call them individualized residential alternatives, the IRAs. But back then, when he was trying to get group homes established, there was a lot of resistance in the community. And I can remember going to some meetings to try to lend support because the neighbors didn't understand the Resource Center, and they thought that the group homes would decrease their home values. And they didn't have any idea what they were up against. And I think that really bothered Mike. At the time, Mark Morton was involved. Mark was the housing director at that point, and I know we attended many meetings with angry people, and I was just taken aback. I could not believe how resistant and how, for lack of a better term, how ugly some people were with their comments. Fortunately, because the homes were so well maintained, because they were good neighbors, because the residents were well taken care of, it became a kind of, there was a tide change where people welcomed them because they kept the properties up. They did not decrease their home values for the neighborhood. I think there was a change, and maybe as more people got to know some of the residents, as people got to know the staff, I think people had a complete change of heart, and all of a sudden that resistance seemed to resolve. It wasn't anything like it had been. So I have to give him credit because he never took no for an answer. If he wanted something done, there was going to be a way, and he would find a way one way or another that he was going to work around the rules, regs, but he would get it done. If he felt it was important, he would do it. One or the other, at the time the grant for our program was written, Dr. DiCarlo had also written a grant for a recreation program, and they bought a houseboat. And that was probably one of the first out-of-work experiences I had where Michael hosted a number of staff on the houseboat. I think at that point Tom Tisdale was the captain of the boat, or Walter Kopchuk, I can't remember on that evening if Walter or Tom was manning the boat. But it was a very interesting experience, to say the least. It was a little bit foreign to me. I'd never been on a boat up until that point. It was pretty novel. And it was accessible because Helen Kern was also on that trip with me. And it was kind of a fun experience, but I can't share much more than that, the details.
Let your imagination
Go
roll.
where you would like.
Or listen to Greg Peterson talk about Al B. Miller in the boat.
Okay.
Another story. Joe DiCarlo. Talk to me about Joe.
Joe DiCarlo was probably one of the nicest, kindest man I've ever met in my life, outside of my dad. Joe was brilliant. He was passionate as well. He knew the field. He cared deeply about everybody. It wasn't just the individuals we served, but he cared deeply about the staff. And, was a wonderful mentor. He brought me along, he listened, he guided me, he and I hired staff together. We got to know, he introduced me to directors at other agencies so that they got to know me. So he really opened the door to my acceptance in the community for what we were trying to do. And he introduced me, helped me gain my first board members because I was fairly new to the community even after a year and didn't have the connections, but Joe was instrumental in helping me get a board together, and he continued to be a mentor for many, many years. We got to be good personal friends, got to know his family, and he was just very, very helpful to everybody. And like I say, he was a mentor to other agencies, the County ARC. He could tell you pretty much anything about the OPWDD. Back then, it wasn't OPWDD. It was the, that was going to escape me, because before it was the DDRO, it was Office for Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities, which, thank you very much, they removed the name mental retardation from.
OMRDD.
Yes, it was OMRDD. It's been a while. We've been through several iterations, but Joe was very, very competent. He was a great grant writer. He was very successful bringing a lot of funds into the Resource Center, and really served as an assistant executive director for many, many years before he had the title. And he was there through the transition when Michael left and Sam Restivo was the interim director. before Paul Tuzano was hired. So Joe was really, Sam Restivo came in, he had been a superintendent of schools, and he had been retired. He was brought in, and he could deal with the day-to-day, but it was Joe and Rebecca Brummagem at the time who really had to run the agency. I mean, Sam just didn't know the developmental disability world and the regs. He knew school, but he didn't know that part of the program.
In 1983, when you're hired by the Resource Center and you tell people in the city of Jamestown, when they query, where do you work? I say they usually at the Resource Center. What was the community reaction of the Resource Center at that time?
I think it was a very misunderstood organization. I don't think, and even to this day, sometimes I don't think people realize the comprehensive nature of the services that they provide. It was, I don't know. I can't say it was really negative, but I just think there was a question of what do they do there. And they thought it was strictly for people who were mentally retarded. A lot of people that could benefit from the services I think probably had the strongest reaction. They did not want to be associated with those people as they referred to them. They wouldn't come right out often and say those who are mentally retarded. But it was, if I go there, people will think by association that I'm also mentally retarded. And hence the reason that I'm really glad they changed the name, because I think it did bring a lot of negative reaction from people who probably were the most likely to benefit from the services. But again, back in that time period, there was a lot of people with physical disabilities, people with hearing deficits, quite often get treated as if they have intellectual deficits as well, and that's not always the case.
Sure.
And people who are labeled on the autism or on the spectrum quite often are very brilliant people. They're just locked in a way that their communication style is different and they don't pick up social cues, but they're very, very bright and very capable. And so I think, unfortunately, as a society, we often judge people by the labels, and that has been very difficult for a lot of people. I can tell you that Helen would very often get asked if we went out together, what will she have to eat? And I would say, ask her. I don't know what she wants to eat. But it was a reaction that, how could she possibly order her own meal? And I'm grateful to the Resource Center for all they've done to get people skills that they can go out into the community and people can understand that having an intellectual disability doesn't give you choices and opportunities, because that's often been probably the worst thing that's happened for people, is to underestimate their capabilities and to give people the sense that because you have a disability, that makes you less capable, you are not as bright, and you can't make choices or decisions for yourself. And there's a dignity of risk and a dignity of failure, just like all of us.
Sure.
Not everybody has made every decision in their life that's 100% perfect or great, or don't regret that if I'd known then what I know now, I wouldn't have done that. And I think that's what we have to accept for people with disabilities as well. You have to give them the freedom to make choices and learn from the consequences. But nobody's putting anybody at risk of losing life or limb. But we need to be mindful of and give people opportunities. So there was a different reaction back then.
Images I have of you are at the ballpark with your friend Kay Neri.
Mm-hmm.
And Kay Neri was the longtime executive secretary to the executive director and the ultimate gatekeeper.
That's correct.
And unfortunately, Kay's not here to be interviewed, but talk a little bit about her. I'm not even sure I know her background, by the way. Where did she come from?
Kay grew up in Celeron, New York, and actually she went to school, grade school, with Wayne Hotelling.
Ah.
And Wayne used to tell stories about Kay. Kay was a tough little girl, even back then. My first impression of Kay was she was a no-nonsense, and she didn't suffer fools. Not at all.
Not at all.
Okay, and Kay let you know exactly what you thought, whether you wanted to hear it or not, or liked it or not. Kay, you knew exactly where you stood with her. I still can see her standing at the counter of the, what is the Kappa building, which used to be the administrative offices, in her probably 3 or 4 inch red spike high heels and black checkered pants, standing waiting for Michael to come out for a meeting. She hated that Michael was always late. She was always pushing Michael to get out. She would try to set the clock ahead so that he would think it was so he would get to a meeting on time. He was notorious for keeping her till after 5 to do the mail, till she finally said, enough of that. My day ends at 5. I'm here at 9. If you want to do mail at 5 o'clock, you can do it yourself. And that's how Kay didn't care who it was or what it was. She kind of was like a second mother to Michael. I mean, I think she really fretted. As you know, Michael had a number of women in and out of his life. Kay fretted over them, fretted over Michael, and tried to kind of guide Michael in a way, I think, to maybe make him a little more mature in some of his decisions. It wasn't always effective. But she was a really good secretary. Kay was excellent. She knew where everything was. She could tell you everything at a minute's notice. But she was a gatekeeper. She didn't let people into Michael's circle unless she really knew that they had to see him. She would keep them at bay, which Michael appreciated. She was funny. She had a great sense of humor, and she had a laugh that just, her cackling laugh, just, I really miss that. She had a laugh that it just, you couldn't help but laugh. And I think her proudest moment was when she got her own parking spot. She got a sign when
Yep.
for her anniversary, they had a big placard right outside. She could see her car right there, and she always used to like to drive bright red cars. She was a car fanatic. She could tell you more about cars and was good friends with Dave, was it Dave Milks? One of them did the garage, actually ran the garage at the Resource Center.
Dave Brink?
No, it wasn't Dave Brink. It was Milks. And I can't think, but it's probably not, but he had a garage, and Kay used to hang out with him too and get car, work done. She liked fast cars. And I think that, Michael with that car, I don't know if she ever rode with Michael very often, but she loved fast cars. Till Kay got saved, as she would put it, she led a totally different life. When she got saved, she got very religious and very involved with church. But she smoked, she drank, and she liked fast cars. Yeah. So that was, I didn't find that out till years after I got to know Kay. And I would never have thought it, because just knowing how passionate Kay was about her church and her religious views, which kind of put her at odds with Michael, because Kay would never lie. And I can't say that Michael was a liar, but Michael could stretch the truth. And Kay just could not. Kay, if somebody was looking for Michael and he was avoiding them and Michael was in the office, she told him Michael was in the office. She was not going to lie, but that just was her thing. When she said what she said, and she spoke the truth. But she was wonderful, and I think Mike was very close to her. I think, I don't know if anybody shared the story, and they may have, about when Michael left the agency, there was some thought that he might have been in a witness protection program. I've never proved it or had it disproved. But he died in an auto accident where the vehicle was burned beyond recognition. I believe it was on a New Year's Day, but I remember Kay was devastated when she heard the news and shared it with me. But to the day that Kay died, I don't believe that she ever thought Michael really did die in that accident. I think she really believes that Michael is somewhere else in another program where he is being protected, and I don't know. It was one of those that could never prove it, but knowing Michael, it could have been, because he certainly had some experiences after he left the Resource Center with some different housing developments and programs that sometimes maybe got involved with some people who had, for lack of a better word, a little bit of a shady past. So I don't know, but Kay always believed that to her dying day, that Michael was still alive. And at one point, I think she said to me that she thought she had actually seen him, that he had come back. This was, and I couldn't prove it, but Kay really enjoyed working for Michael. As much as he drove her crazy, she really respected him and what he did. And she talked about the days when, I think when she actually started, the Resource Center was it was under the viaduct on Main Street in Jamestown. And she talked about the interference of the board members who would try to run everything, who weren't supposed to be running everything. But that's how far back Kay went. It was really hardly anything, so to speak. But she was divorced, and she raised her two daughters on her secretarial salary. She had gone to school to get her secretarial degree, and she could take shorthand, and I was just amazed because it's a lost art, but Kay would sit there and do her notes in shorthand and then go back and type them. What some people don't, what really precipitated her retirement is Kay had Tourette's, which she did not know until she was in her 50s, but she had some, what you would call vocal tics, and she used to rub her nose all the time, and it was kind of a pattern and this clearing of her throat, but as she got older, she developed the head jerking and shoulder twitching, and it was very embarrassing for her. People had no idea how much she had to do to hold back and control it, because when Kay didn't think anybody was around and she really just let it go, she was flailing all over the place with her upper body, and she could no longer type very well. She just couldn't manage it anymore, and she tried every kind of treatment available, and she just could not manage it. They tried, Botox injections into the nerves, and the medication was very, very difficult to handle. They tried some, but it just got to be so much effort for her to do everything she had to do. So in a lot of ways, Kay, love it or like it or not, she was probably the first disabled person that worked for the Resource Center. And as I say, it got so stressful, she just couldn't do it. And after she retired, she came and volunteered for me for a while and answered the telephone. And she would try as she could to get my desk straightened out and file for me, and she would go crazy. But she did her best to get me organized, but unfortunately, Kay passed before she could get me totally organized. But she was a great person.
She did some history. I mean, when she retired, I think she tried to put some sense of historical perspective of the Resource Center, and maybe Steve Watterson, who's here, maybe is the beneficiary of some of that historical gathering, because I know she got a lot of my stuff just to pull minutes and everything else together.
Yeah, she used to do the newspaper clippings, and she did that long before.
Yeah.
I think she used to, anytime the Resource Center was mentioned, she would cut articles out and put them together. And yeah, she was and she had a wonderful memory. Boy, I mean, I wish when she would, bring out names and the history and where they were and when they went from this to this and how many homes. And I think that's what really she admired Michael so much for, how he took that storefront and turned it into the organization that he did. And that he didn't, he got the foundation, and then other people carried it through to create the organization it is today. And it's amazing. I mean, even for me, looking back on 38 years where it was when I started, and all the different facilities and the clinic and, all the other services that they're providing, it's just amazing to think it started with one little storefront.
Amen on all those fronts. And I just learned an awful lot about Kay, and I would call her frequently and saying, "Have you heard from Mike?" That would be the lead-in, my conversation. And we'd have a hearty laugh, and she would have that laugh. And somehow I always expected Michael, who had an equally infectious laugh, to somehow be in the background saying that. fact, when I heard that Caribbean music as we were at the beginning of this, I thought, that's Mike just driving by, listening, some reggae. Other people who were impactful in certainly the earlier days, Rebecca Brummagem was the CFO who really was the financial glue, because it's a complicated business. What was your sense of Rebecca when you saw her?
My first meeting with Rebecca was she invited me to lunch, and we went to the Coffee Cup, which is just down the street from the administrative building, the Kappa building now, and it was, I didn't know Rebecca at all, but it was kind of a meet and greet. But I later learned that it was a meet and greet to find out how on earth did Michael hire you. I only found that out a long time later, that because he had a history of meeting people out and on a weekend, and all of a sudden they'd show up for work on a Monday morning, and they're like, who are you and what are you here? Well, Michael hired me, and Rebecca, unfortunately, was the recipient of a few of those hires, and they were not always very good, but I turned out to be, I guess, a good hire. We're still friends. We served on other boards together, and still keep in touch. When she's had accessibility projects in the town of Mina, she's called me and asked me for advice or help. So we've stayed in touch that way, and but that was my first encounter. And I passed the test. She was always very, very good with me, that she realized that I really was an attorney. I really was hired to to run the Independent Living Center, and that was okay. But Rebecca was brilliant. She really grew the agency, and I can recall at one program where she projected, and this was probably back in the late 80s, she projected the agency would be $40–50 million. And I thought, no way, that this is never going to happen. And I had no idea that it would exceed at one point $70 million, where the manufacturing had really taken off. And I think back then nobody envisioned how extensive the manufacturing operation and government contracts would be. But she could see that, and after she left the Resource Center, she managed an agency, a very large agency in Erie, Pennsylvania, that did the similar kind of work to the Resource Center. But she went on to get her master's degree, and she's one that's a lifelong learner. I have a lot of respect for that she doesn't let anything stop her, or she doesn't sit still very long. She's looking for the next project and the next thing to do. So very capable. I'm glad I've been able to manage to stay friends with her and get advice from her. She really knew how to manage it, but she did have some experiences. One of Michael's lesser hires managed, back then, everything. We didn't have the computers. In fact, I actually bought the first computer that the Resource Center had, and they weren't happy because we have money to spend. And my secretary at the time said, we could get a computer and we could get an Apple, and this would really be a lot easier, because her husband worked at the airport, and they had the beginnings of computer technology even back in '83. So I said, okay, let's do it. Well, everybody else in the agency was not happy because everything else was manually done on typewriters, and they had some memory capability, but it wasn't the same as a computer. And so I was the envy of all the other departments because I had a computer. Well, my secretary did, I didn't have it. But this individual, when all these operations were manual, somehow managed to lose all the Medicaid billing, all of it, with a push of a button, lost everything. And I think at that point, Rebecca marched up to Michael's office and told him, it's either her or me. And that individual was gone pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, that was, and that wasn't the only one, but Rebecca seemed to get several of those hires that were weekend hires that didn't always work out.
And for the camera, if you want to get more detail on that, see interview with Rebecca Brumwagen, including her reaction to Marie Carrubba, which is consistent, by the way.
No.
But she did talk about that was part of her job duty. That's a whole sidebar. Bruce Piatz, Bruce was very engaged in residential. And did your job in the independent living, was that also to find some individuals with residences? Or was it just more job skills or skills?
No, we couldn't. The requirements for the independent living centers is that they would be non-residential. We were not allowed to operate or own any residences.
Got it.
What they were, the philosophy with the independent living movement was not to, for lack of a better term, warehouse individuals in congregate settings. They wanted people to live in the community, integrated into settings that would be part of the community rather than segregated in housing. And that was the stipulation of the legislation for independent living centers in New York State. So we could not, we still to this day don't operate any residences.
A name came up the other time, a recent interview, that I had forgotten about, who was a real personality, and that was Carmen Taylor.
Oh, good grief, Carmen, yes.
So, she was a presence, and most gracious, but when it came to the dining facility, she was it, man.
Yes, and very good friends with Kay. She
Okay.
was very close friends with Kay. Carmen was a reverend, too.
No.
Yes, Carmen was a reverend. And she was a character. And wasn't she from the Bahamas or Bermuda or someplace in the Caribbean? And
Yeah.
she had a personality as big as life. She was, you knew her, you could hear her from all over the place, and she had a hearty laugh as well. But yeah, she and Kay were very good friends early on.
Didn't she move within the organization? It seems to me that though she was kind of always the cafeteria, you
Right,
walk in
right.
there. Certainly on Jones and Gifford work. She was such a presence,
Right.
like the maitre d'. But did she work in other areas?
I think she ended up at the intermediate care facility, if I'm not mistaken. That was where she, because I don't recall. It may have been that, as things transitioned, everybody gets older, and sometimes you can't manage everything, but that's where I believe she ended up when she finally left, was at the intermediate care facility, doing pretty much the same thing, but there.
She's no longer among us, to your knowledge, is she?
I don't know if she passed or not. I'm not sure, because my real connection to her was through Kay
Yeah,
after
yeah.
she left. But I may have seen her, had some involvement where I saw her across from our office on Main Street, but I couldn't tell you if she's
she
still
is-
alive or not.
You would know. Obviously, always my reaction to certain people, you would know she's around
Yeah.
if she were around. And Carmen was that. As you kind of look back on, we're going to talk a little bit about your some of your other things, non-resource center related, but as you look back on the number of years you were a board member, you were committees, you've been involved, what were some of maybe a few highlights where you'd say, I can't believe this event occurred, or I can't believe we actually passed a budget one time, which was $100 million, which was blew my mind away. Things like that. Do you have a couple of real things?
Boy, I wasn't prepared for that question. I think actually probably the highlight was coming down here to work, because it really probably was the most ideal job I could have gotten in terms of who I'm working with and what I'm doing and the people I've had gotten to meet, that I've been able to work with, the friends I've made. And my connection for the Resource Center is 38 years. And all but, I started on the board in 1989. I was filling the seat of, and it's going to escape me now, and I can see the name, and it's going to, Ormsby, wasn't it? Not Ormsby, shoot. That will drive me crazy now. I can't think of who it
I'll
was.
work-
But anyway, whoever I filled the vacancy for, and I was.
Ormsby,
Yeah,
Wayne
Wayne
Ormsby.
Ormsby. I believe that's who it was. Orm, maybe Matt Orm. Matt Orm. There you go. I knew it was a, but I haven't thought about him in years, and I don't know if I ever actually met him. But I came onto the board when I was pregnant with my son, who's now 31. So I took that on, and I've been on the board continuously for all but 10 years. I was off in 2000 and came back on in 2010, but I've been on committees probably since about 1984 or 85, continuously through to now. I've been on the Finance Committee, I've been on the Incident Review Committee, I've been on the Guardianship Committee, I've been on, let's see, I'm missing the board, Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Committee. I've been president of the board, I've been secretary of the board, I've been treasurer of the board, not all, So I've had a connection in the Guardianship Committee. I've been there since the beginning. It's challenged me. I've learned a lot. I think, seeing the growth, I think, it's through the whole organization. I remember when Mike gave me the tour and they had the tent pin operation. That was pretty much the bulk of the work at that point. It was the tent pins. And he was so proud of these, and they were lined up everywhere. And, when he showed me what they were doing, of course, the tent pins, because that's not really been, that's kind of dwindled as a market for the government and the military. They manufactured a lot of other things. The sewing operation turned into one of their biggest assets with the mosquito netting. They did duffel bags and bags that they could drop military supplies from helicopters and planes. Just seeing the growth of I guess if you want to say one highlight is seeing the growth of the manufacturing and the opportunities it's provided for people with disabilities to work in integrated settings with other people who are not disabled. The majority of individuals are individuals with severe disabilities, and I've seen the change where things that there were jobs that they didn't think people could handle, but with technology, they've been able to do a lot of that by computerizing some of the information and the data, that they're able to run machines and operate things that probably 20 years ago wouldn't have been possible for some individuals. So seeing that and the potential and the dignity it's brought to people, to the value of working, the value of everybody likes to get a paycheck, I don't care who you are, and to see that money, or even if it's direct deposited, which I think they all are now, the dignity of work. And I think there's nothing that can replace that, to see, no matter how little or how large the paycheck. I think people really value that, because for people with disabilities, it makes them like everybody else. And there's that commonality. So that's probably the biggest highlight for me, is just seeing what the manufacturing and integration of employment has done for people with disabilities.
One of the early encouragements that when I was, this is back in '77, because nobody really knew what the Resource Center was doing, was to get some of the people connected with the Resource Center into the community. Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, just be out there, because they don't know. And, go from behind the curtain. And you, to me, is probably one of the classic examples of somebody who's affiliated, not only originally hired by and encouraged by, but also you supported the Resource Center, but get involved in politics, get involved in, you're an advocate, you're an activist, and I say it in the most complimentary terms, but was that a natural thing for you to do, to kind of become a public servant in that city council type way?
I've always been interested in politics. My dad, I grew up, my dad had a restaurant bar in Akron, New York, and I probably got the biggest education about working with people from working in the restaurant bar, because all the politicians from the village of Akron, where the restaurant was located, would come in after the village board meetings, and they would start talking about what was going on. And my dad was always fascinated, and my dad was quiet. He listened more than he spoke, and it was a good way to learn, you know, to listen first and speak later after you've got the lay of the land. So I found that interesting. Never thought I'd ever run for anything, although I did in high school. Being a small school, pretty much were in everything because there weren't enough people to do much of anything without everybody doing everything. So did run for those kinds of things. So I had that experience, but I never thought of really running for politics or getting elected to anything. But when an opportunity came up and I was approached, I had been involved and helped as a committee member, but wasn't really looking to do it. But at that point in time, it was kind of being in the right place at the right time. My youngest was graduating from high school. I knew from, you know, politicians can take a lot of hits, and I really didn't feel comfortable having my kids have to listen to their friends and their parents complaining about what the city was or wasn't doing. So I felt it was less risky that my kids would be probably having to deal with their mom being in politics, so it was a good time to get involved at that point. So I've run and I've enjoyed it. It's different. It's a whole different experience than anything or any board I've ever served on. Government doesn't run the same way that boards run, and it's a learning experience, I tell you. It took several years to kind of get your feet under you to really know how government operates, because it is a different beast. And I like the challenge of it. Don't always like some of the decisions we have to make. Can't say I always agree with everything we've done or do. And you live and learn. And, you know, you try to handle the constituent concerns. And I think what I guess to bring it all together, I did at some point become a volunteer mediator, and what I've been able to do through this position as an elected council member is to bring all these things together, because quite often the complaints that people have deal with issues of relationships and problem solving, and they don't know where to go. They don't know how to figure this out. They've never been taught a way to reconcile how you can deal with controversy in difficult situations. And so a lot of what I do is try to find the answer, who can help them, how they can get connected with that. And a lot of times it works very well, even, you know, even within the city, to get people to try mediation and try to get answers instead of just getting very angry and upset, and getting them to listen and try to come up with a good solution that will help and benefit not only them, the community, because it's usually neighbors. It's very different. But I like that. I guess I like the challenge of always wanted to be able to help problem solve, and it can be very rewarding. It isn't so much when people want to complain, they don't want help because they really don't want to change, and that's probably the hardest part.
You're the senior member of the city council, aren't you?
No, not by any stretch. Tony Doltz has been, on the Democratic side, yes, but Tony Doltz has been there over 20 years. Kim Eklund has been there around 17, I think.
Right.
So, but on the Democratic side, yeah, I'm the senior member. I've only been there since 2013.
You knew you were coming in today. You just recently said you weren't ready for that question. Were there questions as you were contemplating that we would gather today about the Resource Center or anything else that you anticipated that I have yet to ask you?
No, I don't think so. I just wasn't thinking about highlights. I think, you know, as you're talking about, you know, the age you've reached and kind of looking back, and, you know, I remember when you got the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Resource Center, and I was a nervous wreck doing that. I really was. And I thought, I don't know how I drew the short straw, because I wasn't the president of the board at that time. I'm going, how did I end up getting to do this? Steve Watterson was a great help. He helped me gather some of the information, but as I put it together, it all started to come together, and it brought back a lot of memories for me, and I could tell by the look on your face there were things that you had not thought about in a long time, and it was fun. It was really kind of fun after it was all said and done, but I was a nervous wreck doing that, and I had visions of the same thing coming in here going, oh my goodness, getting interviewed by Greg after all these years, and it has been easier than I expected, but no, I don't. I think you hit a lot of the highlights, and we talked earlier about some of the people that I had not thought about, and a lot of great people have passed through this organization, that is for sure, and have made it what it is today, and I can only have praise for Michael Raymond, because, as I said, my life and career would have gone in a totally different direction had Michael not hired me and taken a chance on a fresh out of law school graduate. Really, I would not be in Jamestown.
And by the way, immense for the record, she did an incredible job of introducing me and at that particular event, and Dennis Webster sent me a copy of that presentation and my subsequent acceptance, which is on YouTube if you want to watch it. So you can see that which she did, which was really high end. Steve, you've been waiting patiently for that big question. I know it.
You guys have covered everything. I mean, you've been very wide-ranging. I guess the one thing that you started talking about, TRC's perception of the community, and Marie, you've obviously been around with the Resource Center long enough to witness all of the things like the Gus Macker basketball tournament, the Laurel Run, those sorts of things. And maybe just speak a little bit to how those types of community events have affected people's perception of us.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. I should have, because Kay and I were at the first Laurel Run, and we did the takeoff event with Patsy Dodge and Pam Cleary and Wayne Hotelling up in Westfield. And that was fun. Kay, we had our T-shirts on, and we walked. Kay and I had been walking to prepare for that. And that was, I think Wayne Hotelling did a lot, and I should not have not mentioned him, because he did a lot. He did a bicycle race across, well, it wasn't really a race, but he drove his bicycle from Chautauqua County up to Albany, if I'm not mistaken, on one of them, and trying to raise awareness and raise money for the Resource Center. His daughter Laurel was developmentally disabled, and they were very passionate about the Resource Center, along with a number of other people whose children, and have had family members serve on the board. But Wayne was truly dedicated to making people aware of the value of people with disabilities. Wayne was a real champion, and that he started that really with an idea, and it has raised a tremendous amount of money for the Resource Center. The Gus Macker, Vicky Bardo. I got involved volunteering. I was taking height measurements and at the first Gus Macker, and got involved helping volunteer, and it brought street basketball to the city of Jamestown. And eventually were able to run it on our own, not as a Gus Macker, but as a 3-on-3 basketball tournament. That brought a lot of the community down to see the Resource Center. There's been the Step Up for Autism Walk, which has brought a number of people from the community to the Resource Center for that event. There's a lot. They're doing, they're running all kinds of programs to let people know that the Resource Center is more than just the manufacturing, more than just a program for people with developmental disabilities. They serve a lot of people with mental health issues through their clinic. They serve people with primary care needs. They have a dental clinic that was very difficult because a lot of people could not get dental services, especially if you were on Medicaid, and they saw a need, and they were really instrumental in opening a dental clinic. In fact, Peter Mazzone was the first dentist that they hired, and it was in the basement of the house that Michael Raymond lived on Lakeview Avenue.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Dr. Spiros, yes, that was.
Yes,
Dr.
yes.
Spiros' house, yes.
Yes, it was.
That's also where he got married, by the way.
Yes. And had his dog, and Megan used to babysit his dog. Yeah.
We digress.
Yes, I know. But you look at all of that, and I mean, that was amazing back then, just to have that alone when, nobody was treating people with developmental disabilities for dental work. Not, it wasn't done. So I think, integrating these services and providing them to the community at large has really helped. They had audiology, they had speech, OT, PT. It was tremendous, and like I say, it was really inclusive. So I'm probably missing some other ones, but I thought you're right, those were the primary for, bringing people in to see that the Resource Center was also going to be a part of the community. And I know they've volunteered, they've done things, they've done a lot of fundraising for the Chautauqua County Humane Society. They've taken on projects where, the individuals in the residences will take on a project and fundraise. They volunteer in the community, at the library, at the Humane Society. So when you talk about integration, they really have done a lot for those individuals who maybe aren't employable in the community. They do provide volunteer services and do a lot of volunteering for a number of activities. The parade, I guess that's another thing.
Yep.
The Resource Center has been a sponsor of the Christmas parade for many years, and they have Jane Young, who's a master photographer, taking pictures, and she's always involved. They've had participants involved with decorating the floats, and they love that. They do. So they're very passionate, and I think that's brought people new perspective on the Resource Center, that they are part of the community. And I think quite often people have always thought, you're taking, but what are you giving back? But as people have gotten to see what the Resource Center has done, they realize they're a community partner and a big player in the community in terms of improving the quality of life for everybody here.
By the way, I just want to put on record, because this will be lost in the dustbin of history, on the Gus Macker. The Gus Macker tournament was firstly held down on 2nd Street,
Yes.
right near the restaurant, which is no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a sponsor tournament Friday before the Saturday start.
Mm-hmm.
And the sponsors included Phillips Lytle.
Oh, congratulations. I appreciate that, because I have forgotten that, but you're right, I do recall the
We were
sponsors
one of the
tournament.
sponsors. We were asked to field a team because they had a sponsors tournament before the actual tournament started. So we fielded a team of 4 lawyers. Marty Idzik,
Oh, I know Marty.
myself, Tim Eads, and I forget who our 4th one was. Anyways, what I want to be sure, and I kept reminding Kay way back when, and Vicky Bardo, that there was the first shot taken. I was wearing a Scotch hat on, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's playing some college kids. I get the ball, and I'm pretty senior, and I toss it up, and I score. And we're up 2, because it was like on a 3-pointer, 2-0. And so the very first points in the history of Gus Macker play was moi.
I didn't know that,
You did not know that, but that's what I'm telling everybody. I just want this for the record.
But you know what? Sam Lucarello used to play in that tournament, and Sam Lucarello that was another thing. They had the first driver's training program for people with disabilities down
really?
here. They did, and it was impressive. They had a big van, and actually Sam tried to teach Helen how to drive. because I thought, well, if she can learn to drive, she can get herself back and forth to work, until she ripped the rear view mirror trying to adjust it, ripped it off the windshield. And Sam, I think, and Helen both agreed that it probably was not the best idea for Helen to learn how to drive a car. So, but he did try. He did try, and Helen was willing to learn, but she thought it was safer for everybody if she didn't drive a motor vehicle with an engine.
Well, it's good she made an effort. So I want the record to show that. And there is a picture of me in this Scotch red
Yes, I
helmet.
remember the outfit, but I did not remember that you made the first part.
That was it, and I just, a postscript to this, now these college kids, you know, we're wondering, well, maybe they are serious. And I can tell you, the conclusion was, we lost 15-2.
Wow.
So they got serious, and we were inept. And then, what I remember with the bar, and I'm really trying to, it wasn't Shawbucks, but it was another bar right in the corner there. You'd go in and for the riposte, you know, between games, because it was a double elimination for us old timers. And so they played, and we drank and pizza, whatever you did. And the guy came in and goes, "Well, you're up." I took him outside, put my arm around him. I said, "I just want to say on behalf of Phillips Lytle, we forfeit. Congratulations."
Now that you mentioned that, did anybody mention Bogart's, the bar that Lou Lombardo and Michael Raymond owned together?
They did talk about it.
That was an interesting, that used to be the hangout for the Resource Center crew on Friday nights. Never, you know, I can't recall, it's no longer there. It's been torn down, but it was the hangout. And I don't know how, if that's exactly how Lou and Mike, because Lou Lombardo was basically the Steve Watterson of that
Right.
time. He did all the photographs, he did the newsletter, whatever, any communications, but Lou eventually left and went on to become, he was employed at Bosse's, and I can't recall, Bosse's in Geneseo?
Yep.
I think it was in Geneseo. So, yeah, those were very interesting days. But, yeah, if you wanted to find anybody from the Resource Center or Michael after hours, you could probably find him at Bogart's.
And would. And
Yeah.
occasionally I get calls way after hours to go find Mike Raymond.
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there
So, yeah,
was-
Bogart's, Lou talked about that. Louis
yeah.
interviewed
Oh,
Lou.
yeah, I bet you Lou would,
Yeah,
because, like
yeah.
I
But
said.
they weren't partners as long as I thought. Apparently, Lou bought him out. It was a kind of an idea, I'm sure,
Yeah.
born over a drink, that let's do this together. They bought out somebody. And then ultimately that Lou took it on by himself.
Yeah, well, Michael had a number of, you know, irons in the fire. He lived in quite a few different places. You know, he had the house on Lakeview, and the agency, I guess, paid for that residence. And then he ended up with a residence out right next to the residences out on Hunt Road, Shady Side, I think it was. That was an interesting hangout for Michael. And
It was complicated.
yes, it was. It was very complicated, and it was probably corresponded to the number of wives or girlfriends he had at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we could, just so you know, we're currently probably ready to go into a rabbit hole, so we'll probably stop. However, I will tell this one story. It's Dr. Spears. I hadn't thought about this
Okay,
either.
yeah.
Dr. Spears' house, which was 45 Lakeview Avenue, on the corner. And yes, he bought it, I forgot about it.
Oh,
but
yeah, no, it was,
Principally because of the dental.
right.
And it was a huge mansion and wonderful woodwork. It was beautiful, but Mike was going to live upstairs. And in fact, they bought it from an account, Seidman and Seidman.
Okay.
Seidman had it, I think. And anyway, so Mike rationalized buying this big building and convinced the board that this was a good deal because of the dental, and neighborhood dental. And Dr. Peeham's own was going to be it. And since we have this residence just spare upstairs, it would be, maybe I'll live there. And then, of course, he got married there to
Was it Karen Luciano?
Karen. And so I was invited, and Cindy and I were invited, and I get there just kind of with jacket on, and of course Mike was anything but, and there was no photographer, zero. Nobody to capture the event. So I don't know what made me think of this. I'll do it. So they stopped this ceremony. I got in a car and drove all the way to Lakewood to get a camera to come back to be the official photographer of Karen and Mike's wedding. And so that became headline news. And then the rest is history. But Karen had her own history as well.
Oh, yes, she did.
And she was in Bemis Point for a while after they split. And
Did you ever talk to Nancy Ingram? By the way, that was one of, Nancy was one of his
Yes.
former wives, and she ran the vocational rehabilitation department.
funny, we'll go through it just as we're drawing closure. Nancy is one of them. Steve reached out to
Yeah,
her.
she's in Rochester or Brockport, yeah, that's, yeah. Her daughter's in Rochester area or Greece, somewhere around in there.
But
She
she's-
wants to do it
Yeah.
next time she's in town?
No, I believe she would, and Nancy's got a lot of history.
No, she's on the list
On your
here.
list, okay.
And you could probably help us with adding to the list, even as we're talking, we've got to do Wayne Hoteling. Tom McConnell, I will reach out to Cindy to see if that's, but probably Cindy, how long has she been there? Cindy Phillips.
Cindy
She's,
Hitchcock now.
yes, she
she
started
More than 30
after,
years.
yeah, because she started after I did, and Jane Young would know a lot too if you haven't done Jane.
No,
Even though Jane wasn't, but Jane's been the photographer for the Resource Center for as long as I can remember. She's at every major anything,
Yep.
taking photographs, and she's been around. She could tell you a lot about the manufacturing because she was also but now is up at the intermediate care facility, but she had a lot of history with the tent pins and all of that. Pat Walker worked under Tom McConnon at that point.
Have you heard anything about Tisdale?
Bruce Piatz was the one that I thought kept in some touch with, but he didn't know. No.
We just kind of knew he was there with Mike and stayed for a little bit, and that was sort of Case Connect, because I
Yeah.
think they were both on the board of Mike's organization.
Might have been, yeah. Yeah, because I think they did go with him,
Yeah.
or Tom did anyway, and then, but no, I haven't hit any other connection. But that, yeah, but a lot of the former Elmer Mensch was a real strong board member. His daughter and son-in-law got involved, the Richards. Elmer's daughter passed, but they got involved, and you can see so many connections. But it was it Wilbur? Dennison, the one that used to come in that used to drive them crazy because he was a farmer, and he'd come in with his dirty boots, and Mike would get mad because he'd leave a trail all over the office when he came in.
And Wilbur was the ultimate salt of the earth. I mean, really,
No,
just
he
so
was.
genuine, but you're right.
He was, but there was, Tony and Grayo, it was
Well, give me
Joe
your best Joe
Trusso.
Trusso.
Joe Trusso was he was a dedicated board member. Little gruff, you had to get to know Joe, and you
You're
had
being
to,
so kind.
I am. I was board president through Joe Trusso. He was a difficult person to manage, but his care, concern, he and Tony and Grayo both, I can remember where they were extremely upset about funding changed, and some of the people that lived in the residences were capable of being left alone at night. I mean, it wasn't, they had emergency numbers, they had contacts, but the funding wasn't available to make them 24/7 for some of the, not all of them, but some of the homes, and that was one of the biggest fights on the board that I've ever seen. And it was the dignity of risk versus we have to take care of all of them all the time. We can't let them do this, we can't, they'll get hurt, and it's been successful.
Yeah.
The technology changed, I think the comfort level changed, the contacts had changed, so people were okay with it. These people weren't left to that something was going to happen and someone wasn't available. But they were very passionate about. In fact, I believe Tony and Grayo stormed out of the meeting because he was so distraught over how could we let these individuals be by themselves for any amount of time. So that was a big fight. And Joe used to, very critical of other board members, and he was known to shout down people to make his point heard. Very intimidating. That was the one thing that the biggest fault he had was he would shout people down and people would become intimidated and would not participate. They would not say anything, which was hard for especially the women. And these were parents. These are parents of young people with disabilities, and they were there to volunteer and help, and getting shouted down just wasn't a great way to motivate people to contribute. So that was the only thing I say. But his passion, his enthusiasm, his desire to help, and he spoke about the Resource Center everywhere he went. He was very, very much about letting the community know what the Resource Center was about and what they could do and how proud he was of the organization. You know, Carl Kappa was brought on to the foundation board, but that was the core. They were really, really involved and really supportive. And his daughter-in-law, Donna Trousseau, still works there, and his son, I believe, had worked at the Resource Center too, didn't he, Joe Trousseau? Yeah, yeah. So very much got to be a family affair, and very good employees. And
Joe and I, and you probably remember some of that, we went toe-to-toe on things because of that, just being another voice to avoid that intimidation factor. Somebody had to speak up. And we'd do it, and at the end, of course, he grabbed me, and we walked it out the door, best of friends, we had pizza. You know what I mean? His heart is pure gold.
Oh,
and
sure.
Everything you said is dead on. It's very articulate. Just one vignette, I turned off the board or chose not to be on the board. I forget what it was, but something happened where I ended my first wave of being a board member, and a couple of years passed, and I got a call from Paul saying, Greg, you got to come back. Paul, it's been there, done that. You know, I'll be the legal stuff. I'll do everything. I'm not leaving you, but no. Your board is out of control, and Joe has to be neutralized, and you're the only one that could do it. And so ultimately, I came back, and that was the sole role I could tell was to sit there, and whenever he got over an edge, just to be the counterbalance, and he would at least respect that and at least equalize the conversation on the board. And then we both rolled off at the same time, and that, literally, it was the end of that was the end of the role, if you will. Joe, they got an award named after him. I've got a couple games named after, ball games and stuff. And but that's was an interesting sidebar to what you just said.
yeah, and actually, you bring up the point about the games, the board meetings at the ballpark. The board meetings that Kay used to drag. She loved baseball. Kay was a huge fan, and she knew her seat and where she wanted to sit, and she liked going to the ballpark, but she hated the meetings there because things were blowing. She couldn't hear. The bees were active. It used to drive her crazy just because of all she had to do to get it there. But Kay was a huge baseball fanatic, and I miss her enthusiasm for the Mets. That was her team. And she followed them, and nobody was going to get in the way of her Mets games. And she actually did, with her daughter, go to some Mets games and really enjoyed that. And her other was Joe Montana. Forgot to mention, Joe Montana was her guy, and she loved Joe. And there was there was no better quarterback than Joe. She had a football leather jacket with the San Francisco 49ers. And Kay actually owned a piece of the Green Bay Packers. She had one share of the Green Bay Packers, and she was so proud of that. It's like you wouldn't have, a lot of people probably wouldn't have known her passion for sports, her football and her baseball. I don't think she followed basketball.
I think it was Bender, wasn't it, that talked about, he was at some golf auction, and they had a autographed picture of Montana. And he bid heavily to get it, but he knew exactly where it was going to go.
No, she was, she knew what she liked, and but she actually, and I think she ended up going. She might have gone with Tony, the HR. Oh, he used to be. Was it Penn State?
Tony Prinzi.
Tony Prinzi, yeah, I couldn't think of his last name. Tony Prinzi went to games at Penn State with Tony. I'm trying to think who the crew was, but there was a crew, and Kay went along. She was game for a lot of stuff.
Well, we're going to conclude by this. One, Kay Neri, talk about a crew. Mike's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And Kay and Clark Poppleton, I think it was DiCarlo, maybe one other. We flew out to the funeral. Did you go?
No, I didn't go.
Went out to the funeral and had to go to LaGuardia, and then we rented a car to go up to Connecticut. And it was a nice day. And then we were coming back in a car, got to LaGuardia, and all of a sudden it turned out the entire eastern seaboard went black. That was the power grid went down. So we all had our cars in Buffalo. So we just we had to make a decision. We're going to wait it out till the next day or head back, and some of us had to get moving. So we literally drove in a car, and I apparently must have driven most of it. This is Poppleton now, recounting all of this stuff, saying, Greg, I can't believe you drove it. But it was the funniest 7 hours in the history of mankind. If you could have, because everybody was talking about Raymond. Now, we all have our own stories, and, you know, he just passed away, so we could talk about it. But Kay, of course, had most of them, and it was priceless. Right. Now, it was a good thing we didn't tape it. In today's world, I would have, but, you know, you go out there, and in one sense, we were driving all night, and it kept us awake, but my God, that was one for the history book.
Do you recall what that was? Like the month, the year? Because I was trying to explain to somebody about when the coast went out. And
You know, honestly, I don't. The only thing, no, I don't. I do know that thereafter we had a eulogy, or had a memorial service at JCC. I was either the master of ceremony or one of the eulogists, and when I got done, Kay came up and go, "That was wonderful, Greg," and we just laughed because we knew someplace somewhere Mike is going to watch this thing because we're going to throw it up because we recorded it, and he'll be laughing terribly. Because he'll see us talk about him, when in fact we probably wouldn't have talked like that if he were still alive, if we thought he was still alive. And that was the big giggle, you know. Did we just do this for his benefit?
I told her, she thought he'd reappear. She was convinced.
Oh, I'm with her. I mean, there was a few of us, and there's too many weird things.
I know. It was very odd the way it happened.
And no body, no.
That's what I mean. It was just like it was staged to make him disappear, but he really didn't disappear.
Yeah, kiss his wife goodbye, who was, by the way, charmer. I mean, the last wife.
I didn't know her.
Even Kay, I think, would agree that he finally got it right. And, I mean, everything just was right, and all of a sudden kisses her goodbye, and that's the last anybody knows of Mike, who's probably in Buenos Aires.
Or Costa Rica.
And he would fit in, too.
He definitely would. The other thing, Kay was a huge Elvis fan. That was her other one. She did not strike me, but she loved Elvis. Oh my gosh, that was her. That was her music, and yeah, she was very different. You know, she had so many different sides to her. But yeah, she did actually get to see Elvis the year he died. She and Vicky, her daughter, went to Rochester and saw him. That was when, you know, his health was declining, but she did get to see him in person.
Wow.
She never forgot that one.
That's good. Well, we've covered a lot of ground
I
here,
know,
and thank
I
you
know,
for your
Greg.
time,
I
and
don't know.
delighted we could find the time to do it.
Thanks. It wasn't as bad as I thought.
How's that for
Yeah, no, Rebecca Worm, she goes, call me and let me know how it goes.
Oh, you
And
really
because
checked with-
I
did you
call-
check with
I
her?
did, I called her up, I said, Rebecca, Greg's called me, wants to interview me for this thing. I said, I don't know. She goes, oh, go ahead and do it. She goes, I told him I'd do it. I said, I called her up after, she said, oh, it was fine. She goes, it wasn't, Greg's such a great interviewer. She said, it'll be fine. I said, I don't know. I said, I really don't know about this. She goes, oh, go ahead and do it, so. I really did check with her before I agreed to do it.
Well, I forget, who was it that, yeah, I think it was Clark or somebody, Bruce, they called around too,
They didn't call me, but
Yeah,
I
they were
did
calling
call.
her. So it got to be kind of a buzz all of a sudden. You're like, are you going to get called? Did you get Lombardo? Lou did too. Lou called Bruce. What did he say? What did he ask? What are the parameters? Does this guy know more than we should answer?
I don't know. It has been fun, though, because I haven't thought about a lot of the people in a long time. But, and you're right, this is a great way to get it memorialized for the Resource Center.
And he'll figure out 20 years from now when we're all gone what the story is that needs to be told.